So good afternoon. Thank you guys for joining us. This whole summit has been amazing, and we still have more panels to go and more information to share. So in this particular panel, we're going to be talking about co-benefits and really spotlighting how we improve air quality by not only reducing greenhouse gases, but providing economic benefits, social and environmental benefits. So, in other words, looking at ways that we can take action that delivers multiple benefits to the community. And we have some great panelists who are very experienced in this area. I'll introduce them. So, Lisa Lynn, who may look familiar to a lot of you guys. She's the Director of Sustainability for Harris County. Her role began in 2022 with more than 18 years experience across public sector, nonprofit, higher education, and she's led the development of the Harris County 2023 Climate Action Plan and co-developed the county's climate justice plan. These are all moving us in the right direction. Lisa is lead AP and has also directed sustainability efforts for the city of San Antonio and Rice University. Welcome, Lisa. And then Dr. Meredith Jennings, who is the program manager at the Houston Advanced Research Center, which is HARC. She's a certified climate change professional. She's earned her PhD at the University of Miami's, is it Rosendale's?
Oh,
Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science. She joined HARC and has led and supported many projects around our community. One with the City of Houston's Climate Action Plan, which is also moving us in the right direction, the Houston-Harris Heat Mapping Project, and the Harris County Precinct 2 Air Quality Assessment. Her work, she works on building partnerships and promoting community resilience and increasing access and affordability in a renewable energy space. And I'm actually going to be the third panelist. This is going to be really informal, and we're going to have a discussion, and we're hoping that you guys will be able to chime in and feel comfortable asking questions. I'm Farah Andrews, as Ben mentioned earlier. I am the Air Quality Principal Planner currently for the Houston-Galveston Regional Council. I'm coordinating the EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program for our 13-county region. I've also led the climate planning effort for the City of Dallas's first comprehensive climate action plan. I've worked on 2 air quality plans for the City of Austin and also contributed to their climate plan. I'm gonna move from behind this lectern. Not so academic and friendly. I feel like this is a safe space. I hope. So, and we didn't really prepare slides, but we're gonna talk through some of the major considerations and concerns, and just expand on how we can really maximize co-benefits. So I did some questions together. I'm going to start with the first question, and I'll let each of our panelists answer this. So, ladies ready? Okay, so our first question. Let's start with share some experiences with regional and local air quality planning. What lessons have you learned about designing strategies and simultaneously addressing ozone, particulate, greenhouse gases, and how are those lessons guided your future planning in this region?
You start.
Oh, all right, sounds good. And I was actually going to say, I think between the 3 of us, we've covered Texas, the metros of Texas. So I've also worked in the city of San Antonio and their climate action adaptation plan. So I think there's a lot of experience, I think, on this. So as Far mentioned, the county has our first climate action plan and first climate justice plan, which is pretty amazing given this office has only been around for about 3.5 years when I first started in 2022. I would say, honestly, when I was working with the city of Houston, I had no idea what was happening with the county back in the day. And I think that talking to community members, talking to a lot of folks, there was a lot of, what does the county do? And like, what kind of sustainability initiatives are they working on? And it really wasn't until our office was created that we started kind of pulling together. There has been a lot of good stuff, right? In the public health department, they've been leaders for a really long time. But then really now adding in the kind of pollution lens of it and really tracking our emissions, getting the data. It has been very, very challenging at the county to find like who has the data, how to clean that data up, make sense of it. And so the climate action plan that we have brought to court in 2023, that was our first.
We cannot hear you without that. Thank you.
Okay. And so one of the first things that we looked at is a strategy to look at our internal operations for our climate action plan. And that was something that Meredith worked on with us from the HARC team side, and that we turned around in like 3-4 months, I think. Awesome. That was a really quick, because we kind of know what the strategies are. Like, we didn't have to start from the very basics. Like, we looked at best practices, we looked at what other cities and counties have done, and we knew what we had to do, and we just started to focus on the action piece of the climate action plan. And so I think back to your question, I mean, so our office wasn't created to focus primarily on air quality, because that's what the pollution control services does. But our office really looks at the climate pollution side and what are the potential economic benefits for saving money at the counties, on our kind of utility savings, that sort of thing, which I'll touch on later. But yeah, so that's been kind of our charge since we started in January of 2022.
You've been busy.
Yeah, Lisa's incredible. So I first moved to Houston in 2017, like a week after Hurricane Harvey. And I came here to do a fellowship after I got my PhD at Harris County Public Health. And so I really had no idea what public health was. This was a science policy fellowship through the National Academies. But the reason I chose this office was because they wanted someone to work on climate change and health. And so during my year there, I helped to do the initial kind of literature review and engagement within the different, divisions and offices at the health department on like what is that connection between climate and health, what types of initiatives are happening at the federal level, at the state level, what are the federal agencies offering in terms of frameworks, what's the existing landscape look like. And now Harris County Public Health actually has climate change is one of the programs that they do. They've done assessments on heat-related illnesses. We actually did a study at HARC with Harris County Public Health on using a climate model to see what's the relationship between heat and heat-related illnesses, and what does that look like in the year 2100? How many more illnesses are we going to see? But anyway, so even just looking at from the health side, there's a lot of connections between building resilience. And so after my fellowship, I came to work at HARC, and my main job as a postdoc at HARC was to work with the city on developing their first climate action plan. And at the same time, they were developing Resilient Houston. And so one of the things when we talk about co-benefits of climate action is resilience. And Resilient Houston it really does look at everything very holistically. And so that's where I'm thinking about, where do people live, work, and play? What are the things that are keeping them from thriving? And so sustainability and resilience really do go hand in hand. If we're going to have these climate change impacts more frequently, causing harm to our communities, sustainability, the goal is to reduce emissions so that these events aren't happening as frequently. And so that's where you get the Paris Global Climate Accord and things like that. But it's also, if you're going to be, designing a generator to make this shelter, have backup power, you want that facility to be not wasting energy. So that's the other angle where sustainability is an important factor for looking at resilience is, are we, is that building even efficient? So resilience hubs are a really cool, I guess, concept that have been used in lots of communities, including Houston. And so a lot of the things that they do, in addition to just providing backup power, is how do you build community? So that's just another, I guess, example of some co-benefits is how do you think about sustainability and resilience holistically to solve multiple problems.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. So both in my work in the city of Dallas and the city of Austin, working on air quality and climate plans, one of the big lessons that I learned is that it's when you're taking a multi-pollutant approach to strategies, you tend to get more buy-in. And the way that plans really move through the process and become actionable and you see, things happening is when you get not only political buy-in, but community buy-in. So being able to express strategies in more than just terms of greenhouse gas reductions. So one example that really stands out in my mind, in Dallas, we put together this building energy efficiency policy. And when we were taking it through the process, we were really marrying it with our air quality program and talking about how much pollution it was going to reduce. And I think what we really realized when that program took off is that not only did the community see co-benefits, like energy efficiency is just one of those low-hanging fruits where you can save money immediately. This is one of those strategies you put in place. It doesn't pay off like in 10, 15 years. It can pay off on your next utility bill. So like adding weatherization to homes and so the community saw benefits immediately, which was great. And then not just the community, but municipalities and businesses. So, just when looking at what strategies work best for communities is often really wise to not only weigh how much pollution is this going to reduce, but also how else can people benefit from these strategies and are those benefits adding a real value to the community? So yeah, that's why I thought co-benefits is just a really great way to make progress and push that rock up the hill. So let's go to the next question. Let's see. I had some great questions picked out for you guys. So how can local government and regional agencies best qualify or communicate the benefits like public health improvements, job creation, and air quality and climate action to stakeholders and founders?
Yeah, go first.
So I guess I've got two examples that of programs that we worked on with the county at HARC. One is a forestry initiative. We developed, so we do our work through grant funding. And so we got $15 million from the USDA, and Stephanie Gray was at AgriLife at the time, to plant about 56,000 trees across Harris County, working with the flood control district, working with Harris County Commissioner precincts, working with the Houston Parks and Recreation Department. But it wasn't just like, let's plant trees to save the planet. It was like, there's so many other benefits. Like it was rainfall capture, looking at the air quality benefits. But we also included in that grant workforce development, because it's not just, okay, we're going to hire contractors to put the trees in. We wanted youth to get internships. We wanted youth to get work crew hands-on experience working in this green workforce. And so we included that as part of our grant package so that it's not just let's get the trees in the ground, but we're also helping, really invest in the future of this work. So like when we're designing these programs, it's helpful to think about what are all the things you can kind of tack on to this to not just be like, this one aspect. Another program we worked on was called the Texas Solar for All Coalition. So this was an EPA grant. Unfortunately, it's been impacted by the recent administration, but that was kind of built in a similar fashion where it was a coalition of multiple nonprofits and local governments across Texas, and there was an implementation component where we were going to be developing solar, but we wanted to also include workforce development, kind of a labor requirement that those installers of the solar be hiring from these workforce programs. And there was also community engagement. There was also community engagement in the forestry one, hence AgriLife being a partner. But anyway, so it's really, again, going back to can you build these holistic programs that can really engage the public, can invest in workforce, but also, again, improve air quality and be sustainable.
I would add to that, again, going back to our climate action plan, something that we've really tried to lead with is the economic benefits, the taxpayer dollars being saved because of these implementation actions with our climate action plan. We would say that that's kind of a bipartisan priority, right? Like being responsible, fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars is something that we need to really keep in mind. And I would say at the county, before our energy management team was stood up, I remember this particular summer, I think it was summer of 2022 when I first started. It was another hot summer. There were voluntary reductions from ERCOT, asking for voluntary measures, conservation measures to be implemented, and the media reached out to the county and asked, what are we doing in response to that? And keep in mind, we have over 2,300 meters at the county. So that's our buildings, street lights, traffic lights. And we reached out to a department to kind of get that answer. And the answer was, we're not really doing anything. Like our power is cheap. Why should we save? And I'm like, that's not the right answer. And so it started from that point, right, to me hiring our first energy manager, who's now helped implement scheduling and demand response programs and building automation, kind of programming to make sure that we're actually not wasting energy. We had buildings that were just going on 24/7, right? Cooling buildings when there's no occupants in the building, which is not the right thing to do. And so just money going out the window. We actually, as part of the climate action plan, stood up a revolving energy efficiency fund, which was a challenge. We had brought that idea to the city when I was at the city many times, and there was kind of no uptake in that idea because a lot of the savings just went back into the general fund. But this was something that I saw as a success at the city of San Antonio. So I brought that to my boss, and he's like, yes, that makes sense. And our budget director said, yes, that makes sense. So we actually stood up the Revolving Energy Efficiency Fund, or the REEF, which now pays for 3 to 4 staff members on my team. And we've been able to achieve, in the last report for our Climate Action Plan annual report, we saved $1.4 million last fiscal year. We're on track to save around $2 million this year. And that was savings of like 8.7 million kilowatt hours last year. And so we're just, again, this is just the tip of the iceberg too. We have so much more to do, and we're already seeing these savings. And that's something that Commissioners Court really appreciates because it's dollars saved. We're being fiscally responsible. We're reinvesting those savings back into people and training and more energy efficiency and energy conservation measures. And that's a great tie into grid resilience too, right? So that media call was about grid resilience. Like, what are we doing to help stabilize the grid? We weren't doing anything then. Now we are doing stuff, which is a great success story. I would also say with within the Climate Action Plan, there is a section around clean vehicles too. When I first started, pollution control was the only department that had any EVs. There were 12 EVs at that point, and they were wanting to do it because they wanted to be a leader, right? They're helping, fight climate or pollution, and so driving clean vehicles was the right thing to do. Since then, we've been able to grow our clean fleet to over 70 vehicles now. And one of the key pieces for us at the county is we have a lot of law enforcement vehicles. Most of our vehicles are law enforcement vehicles, right? Between the sheriff's office, between the constables. And so we really had to get their buy-in in order to make any type of, major change in seeing those emissions drop. And so now we have sheriff's office testing EVs, we have constable precincts testing out EVs, but also some of the big departments like engineering and the toll road authority. And we actually have a great person in the Universal Services Department, Chris Vieira, who's helping lead that fleet electrification strategy. And he's actually been able to look at some of the internal data. Like now that we've kind of been running this pilot, what are the true cost savings, right? There's always these great calculators that, DOE has, and we can always plug in those, but like it'd be nice to actually look at our own internal data and understand what the cost savings are. So he just kind of reported that if you look at the total cost of ownership, right, we usually have vehicles for about 8 years at the county before we retire the vehicles. For an internal combustion vehicle, right, your normal kind of gas-powered, diesel-powered vehicle, it's 13 cents per mile. For a hybrid, it's about 6 to 10 cents per mile. And then for an EV, it's about 3 to 6 cents per mile. So those are the things that he's been able to look at, internal data, like cost savings for not only fuel switching, but also looking at the reduced maintenance cost. And one of the things that he's actually also highlighted is if you look at the engine hours that are, like when you're running the vehicle, we also have a lot of idling vehicles, unfortunately, and anti-idling is one of the Climate Action Plan strategies. We actually have a precinct 2, that was testing integrating telematics into their precinct 2 vehicles. So it kind of gives you kind of data like how are people operating these vehicles? Are they running? Are they idling? They were actually able to implement an anti-idling policy upon themselves. And one of the things that they saw was they were able to save, I think, almost like $1,500 a week for just implementing that anti-idling policy. And they were also able to kind of just help change driver behavior. And because EVs don't idle, a lot of the people were like, okay, now I want an EV because I can still run the air conditioning when I'm, out there at the parks or, fixing kind of road and bridge maintenance issues. So all these, success stories are starting to kind of roll in. We're just trying to do our part in communicating that out and saying this makes fiscal sense. These strategies are good for the bottom line for the county, but also helps reduce emissions in the region too.
Real quick, you mentioned, you said it was gonna be a little bit of.
Yeah, go ahead.
But you mentioned that you're doing something to communicate that information out. What exactly are you doing? Because that's one thing for me, living in another city and all around the state. It doesn't seem like there's enough communication. These case studies, these use cases in front of everybody.
Yep.
To increase adoption.
I'm with you there. So right now we do an annual report to Commissioner's Court. This past year, I think we released it in January, February. Usually do kind of on the anniversary of the adoption of the Climate Action Plan, but we feel like that's not enough, right? Once a year is not enough. And even for me, like when I try to, report our KPIs to leadership and stuff, it's hard for me to even extract that from my own team. So that's what our focus is for this upcoming fiscal year, is to get that data out into the community in a much more meaningful and more frequent way, honestly, because it's something that it's these case studies. Yeah, I mean, they're so important to be like, see, it's not that. I'm not going to say it's not that hard because culture change is also really hard in the county too, but it's so important to say like it can be done. The technologies are there. It's just like the adoption and all, everything else that comes along with it. It's worth the effort to make that change. But yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, we do a weekly newsletter, a monthly newsletter, but this is like once a year. And, if I'm in Dallas trying to speak to their police department about electrification, they look at me like I've got 4 heads.
Yes.
Not 3 or 2, but 4.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
see, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Do you have a use case that is actually functional?
We actually looked at Dallas first. Dallas, I think, had, I think it was Dallas County had, they got Tesla EVs like back a couple years ago,
They did.
right? Yeah, and so I think that we were trying to learn from Dallas County at that point to understand how do they procure those, because at that time there were the manufacturing shortages, like the supply chain was a mess.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think,
Um,
oh, one more.
So whatever your agencies are, you have a PR department. The PR department needs to have that as line item searches that go out to Google or whatever.
Mhm.
Do EVs work in Houston?
Yeah.
And just have some line items that, and it could be old data. I mean, you read all the time, this is a stat for 2023. So it doesn't have to be current data, but just these line items that you're saying that we're taking note of, just to have that in a Google search
Yeah.
where the average person can say, oh, you know what, the Tesla saved them X number of dollars. Oh, it's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff to really promote and to have out there in good standing.
I think you're all right. These stories are so important to get out there, and talking about the multiple ways that we all benefit in the community from, reducing pollution. I also like that you mentioned the data, because I think the data is important to really selling these stories. Like when you can say we've reduced this many hospital stays, or we've saved this much money. I think having the data and doing the tracking and keeping the numbers and then making that personal and relatable, these live stories. That's really what I love. And I love that in the morning session, we heard a lot of these live stories from our speakers. And I think that just drew me in. I lost track of time. We probably went a little over, but it was a really great session. I think something else that I would add to this conversation, as far as live stories, I think one of the really important things, like I mentioned before, is tying that data to the story, not just saying that we did a thing, but this is how the thing affected you, and this is, and qualifying that with the numbers. Like I've been a public servant for over 30 years, and I know that governments and agencies really want to hear about how much money you've saved. But I think that's only half the story. Like, we still have to talk about how many hospital visits were avoided, and really start bringing in the personal aspects and relating this directly to people's health. Like the Clean School Bus program. I know Ben works really hard to clean up vehicles, and he's having a great meeting that he's mentioned earlier. So you guys have an opportunity to sign up for that. But, not just saying that we cleaned up this many school buses, but it affected this many children, and we also, maybe reduce the amount of asthma attacks that we saw at school drop-off zones because of this activity. So I think, keeping that part of the story together too, just like really, connects with people. I'm going to move us into the next question. Let's see. Oh, we're doing great. I like this question. I'm jumping around, guys. So how can equity considerations be integrated into co-benefits planning and ensuring that vulnerable communities share in the environmental and economic gains? Who wants to start?
So at HARC, we're a sustainability nonprofit. We work with local governments, but we also work with other community groups and leaders. So we have a grant that's about to end that's with the Department of Energy, and it's like a quasi-research grant, but also there's like an implementation component, and it's on how to improve the weatherization assistance program, like pipeline, because to qualify for free weatherization services that ultimately came from the federal government that are trickled through all these different programs, There's like all these criteria. People fall off the list. There's reasons why they're denied. Maybe their roof has a patch that needs to be repaired. Maybe they don't have a clean title to their house. There's all sorts of reasons why people face barriers to accessing this weatherization program. And so our goal is to really like come up with a framework to improve that. So we work with Baker Ripley, who is the county's administrator for this federal program, but also we partnered with an organization called SEER, which is the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience, which Coco is, I believe, a member of, and and Air Alliance. And so they use their Climate Ambassador program to help residents get their paperwork together and also educate them about these programs. And it's like I volunteered one day to help, because there's like one day where you have like 3 hours to get these applications in. I saw a quote in the Houston Chronicle recently that there were 100,000 applications for LIHEAP, which is the low-income home energy assistance program in Houston, for 5,000 spots. 100,000 people going for 5,000 spots. So there's great need for energy burden. And so we partnered with SEER. They used their climate ambassadors, and they've really done an amazing job educating people about weatherization and even providing simple kits that people can take home and weatherize their house themselves. Obviously, being a beneficiary of that program would be more ideal, but there's things that they can do now to seal windows and doors and things like that. So, we work with partners that have these community connections, and having these, programs that have these ambassadors, which is what we heard about from Juan earlier. They really help make it more equitable, because there's that trust factor, and you're actually working with people that are on the ground. So anyway, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I would say, so while our climate action plan for internal operations is very internally focused, the equity component is really, I would say, our climate justice plan, which was adopted in April of this year. So we're the first county in the U.S. to have a climate justice plan, which is exciting and scary at the same time. And so this was very different, like a very different approach from our climate action plan that we worked on with HART, because when we did that in like 3 to 4 months, this climate justice plan took 2+ years. We also worked with SEER as our community partner from the very beginning, from the inception of the plan. We were like, this needs to be centered on communities, on the people of Harris County, especially frontline communities. And, Harris County being the 3rd largest county, there's 4.8 million people. It's very challenging to figure out, like, where do you start with a planning process like that? And so we started in the first year looking at the visioning of the plan, like having meetings across the 4 precincts, trying to understand what are the vision and values of our community members who are fence line community members, and trying to understand what do we need, what are the kind of the values that need to be taken through the whole planning process. So we did that in 2023. In 2024, so last year was actually the full planning year, and that was something we were leveraging the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant funds to try to understand what those vision and values mean in actions. And so throughout last year, we basically were able to kind of find 5 themes. It emerged from our community advisory group, our advisory collaborative group. That was actually kind of an interesting take on kind of community advisory just groups in general, because we had SEER select 5 members to sit on that group, and then we had youth leaders also apply to serve in 5 spots there, and we also had Commissioners Court nominate 5 individuals. So we had 15 people, community members, chosen by different partners across this planning process, and from those 15 members, they helped us kind of figure out what the themes were that we needed to bring to the community. So those themes end up being around ecology and infrastructure, economy, culture, and community. But threaded throughout is kind of tied to this co-benefits panel, because it's clean water, it's clean energy, clean healthy soils, job training and development, and we felt like leading with quantitative data only wasn't the right way. I think the storytelling piece, what Farah was talking about, was so important in having that be the center of this plan versus like kind of what we did with the climate action plan, which was like very data driven. This one really needed to use the data of like lived experiences. Like what are the things that we've been hearing from community members and making sure that plan reflected that. And I will say there are things in the plan that traditionally probably wouldn't be in a typical climate action plan in other cities. I mean, but we wanted to reflect what we heard throughout those years. So you'll see things like that, these end up being kind of in the future actions, right? Because there's an asterisk next to some of them because we don't even know how to implement, and the county doesn't even have the ability to implement for some of these. But ideas around like climate taxes came up and we're like, well, that's, something that we can't really do, but we want to make sure that it's in there because that's what community members had brought up. And so we really tried to stay true to the process, but a lot of the nearer term actions, right? So looking at reducing costs for households wanting to go solar, looking at community gardens, all of these things have co-benefits. And now our job is to really try to understand how to add that quantitative data layer to say like, yes, we are achieving these goals, but it starts with working on this together and implementing this plan together.
Now, this is a great conversation, and I don't know how many of you were in the panel earlier. You know, it's really hard to talk about making environmental improvements without also acknowledging that there are, not everyone is experiencing like climate change at the same rate. There are people who are having like immediate, right now on the ground today, effects, and then some of us may not see those negative effects until further down the road. So really, I think one of the challenge in coming up with like climate plans and air quality plans is making sure that these fence line communities, front line communities. I know in the earlier panel there were so many terms thrown out, but really it's just the fact that there are people who are, and when you talk about vulnerable communities, it almost encompasses everyone, but there are people who experience this more deeply. And I think one thing that I did want to add to that conversation is there's a workforce component that we also need to consider when we're going through planning processes and implementing climate plans. Like one thing that we're doing right now with our air quality action plan is we're doing a workforce analysis because we want to make sure that while we're talking about including these strategies, we also have the workforce to support that. And not only do we have the workforce to support that, but we have the workforce in the community where the actions need to take place. And we talk about training. And I think this has been a theme that I've seen in all the planning processes I've been in, like in Dallas and in Austin. And I'm glad to hear you ladies mention that too. I have other exciting questions, but I did want to give the audience an opportunity to ask our illustrative panel some questions. If you had some thoughts, this is real informal, so raise your hand, yell out, no little yellow hands in the air. This is great, we're in person. I saw a hand go up here first.
So I think you'll see it in COBRA is a tool that is, I think it's EPA, where you can put in your emissions and it calculates the number of hospital visits avoided, for example, premature deaths and things like that. But for the planning documents, I'm trying to remember, but typically you'll see like if something's like energy efficiency, we'll say, okay, air quality is a co-benefit, cost savings is a co-benefit. So I think sometimes we do characterize like as a table, like check, which ones, can also have that. I think the city of Houston's plan did that. Did we do that with the internal operations plan? I don't know, we might have talked about it, but yeah. So yeah, I think some of these plans do look at like, and the Resilient Houston, I've always joked, is like a Da Vinci's Code. And like if you pick it up and you're like, whoa, like anyway, it's got all these symbols and things like that for you to kind of cross-reference what's going on.
Yeah, I would say, I think in addition to the co-benefits analysis, so we actually have a lot of plans now that we've had to overlay on top of each other to help prioritize and make sure that our actions don't get lost in like bigger plan. Like the county also adopted its first strategic plan in the last year, and luckily a lot of our climate action plan actions were nested within that strategic plan. So it's now it's been reinforced as a court priority, which is great. And I think that's one of those things where we're trying to kind of point to, like, Commissioners Court, you voted on this, you said this was a priority, so you're carrying out, these actions because this is something that you've, said is important.
I think I saw a question over here. Okay.
Are you able to say, I guess, like in the previous session, we heard a little bit about roundabouts, and there's all these sort of words. Is there like a winning thing that we should do more of at the expense of other things? Like Lisa, you were just talking about this. Is there something that stands above that in terms of co-benefits, like money saved or something like this?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the audience. When we bring like transmittals and updates to Commissioners Court, we oftentimes will lead with that because it's been a very challenging fiscal environment for local governments. We'll lead with that, but then also talk about kind of the other things that we've seen that are a byproduct of that being the lead. But we start with that. We'll kind of go back to, like, remember our emissions target was reducing it by 40% by 2030, and we've been able to. We're getting there. It's a little bit slow towards the beginning, but we're hoping to kind of ramp that up. And so far, we've seen I think over 2% reduction in our emissions from 2021, but we have 5-6 more years to go, and we have some like bigger pieces, I think, down the line that we'll be able to reach that 40% goal. But yeah, we always want to tie it back to the emissions target that Commissioners Court has voted on too. So I think that's another thing.
So something I would add to that, offer to that question. Like, one thing that we did initially when we started working on our air quality action plan is we did an inventory just to look at, of course, where our emissions were coming from and where we might have the biggest opportunities to, reduce greenhouse gases. But in that inventory process, we were also able to see not only where we were able to look across pollutants, so that we could create this new story for our air quality plan that, this is not only a plan where we're reducing greenhouse gases, we're also curating all of these other co-benefits. And I think what we saw, one of the things we saw in that inventory is that we had some big opportunities in our transportation department. Because transportation not only contributes to ozone, it contributes to particulates, it contributes to greenhouse gases, it contributes to, like, you can see immediate negative health effects from tailpipe emissions. So I know a lot of this information came out in our first session. So I know that's a place where moving the needle gives us a big bang for our buck. You thought.
Yeah, this actually ties back to what Meredith was saying with, in terms of using the resilience kind of lens to use as a co-benefit. So one of the stories I also like to share with the fleet electrification kind of our journey, I think early on we had one of the constable precincts say that they were very interested in trying EVs because during Winter Storm Uri, they were, kind of manning the Emergency Operations Center on the west side of Harris County. They lost fuel delivery. They couldn't get access to like gasoline or diesel, but they had power at the building. And so actually the fuel diversification of their fleet was like, this is why we want to try EVs, because they couldn't get to the gas station, but you get power from the building. So I think the resilience lens is also another thing that we try to kind of highlight where applicable.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions, and I saw one up. Was that? Oh, don't be shy. I did see hands. There you go.
At some point, the power or the gasoline or whatever these are, and the impacts that are happening with that, you have a diminishing return. Because you have so many of those, you're not going to exponentially go forward with it. But also at some point, your services and this research and everything has to be paid for through its own resources, not from grant funding,
Yes.
to keep that kind of dynamic up. So the return on investment is that your departments are generating some kind of revenue that comes back to you, that's how it keeps the cycle.
And okay, Ben, you did have a question.
Me? No.
Oh, you were telling me I had 1 minute.
Yeah, you
Okay.
have room for one question,
Okay.
but that's a short one, so you have about a minute and a half, so go.
Okay. Anybody have half a question? Well, this has been an exciting panel, and I'm absolutely honored to be up here with these ladies because they move the needle. Yeah. Thank you guys.